The first flicker of the security camera feed was a smear of corrupted data, a promise of the rot to come, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled my marrow, that this was no ordinary archive. I was Ezra Harris, a digital archaeologist of the forgotten, an excavator of the buried whispers that festered in the dark corners of the net. My quarry tonight, the digital ghost of Blackwood Asylum, a place whispered about in hushed tones, a nexus of suffering that had long since calcified into myth. The file, encrypted with a key sourced from the deepest, most fetid trenches of the dark web, bore the label Manifest .28. Not a date, not a serial number, but a declaration, a countdown, or perhaps a tally. The first images resolved. Not with the sterile clarity of modern surveillance, but with the grainy, pulsing unease of analog decay. Shadows writhed. Not from inadequate lighting, but as if imbued with a malevolent sentience, stretching and contorting like taffy pulled by unseen hands. This was not the clinical documentation of a derelict institution. This was a raw, unedited scream captured on magnetic tape. My fingers, usually steady as a surgeon, were suddenly fugitory, a tremor that betrayed the rising tide of dread. The camera, fixed in what appeared to be a padded cell, documented a tableau of abject despair. A figure, gaunt and skeletal, clawed at the walls, their fingernails ragged stumps that bled onto the peeling paint. The sound, when it finally bled through the static, was a wet, rasping sound, like a dying animal trying to dislodge a mouthful of gravel. Then the Fudenkoth appeared, a hulking silhouette against the dim corridor light. He was not a man of flesh and blood, but a distortion, his head too large, his limbs unnaturally elongated, a caricature of authority warped into something monstrous. He moved with a disturbing grace, a predator surveying its domain. His gaze, though unseen, felt like a physical weight pressing down. He produced a thin, almost surgical scalpel, and with a swift, brutal motion, excised a piece of flesh from the inmate's arm. The screams that followed were not of pain, but of a profound existential agony, a sound that seemed to tear at the very fabric of reality. The feed flickered again, and when it returned, the warden was gone, and the inmate was calmly, almost serenely, gnawing on the raw wound a single, obsidian-eyed cat watching from the corner of the cell, its tail twitching with an unnerving curiosity. The footage shifted. The camera now positioned in what looked like the asylum as administrative offices. Dust motes danced in the sickly shafts of light that pierced the grimy windows, illuminating stacks of decaying patient files. A disembodied voice, deep and resonant, filled the silence, not speaking words, but emitting a series of guttural clicks and whistles that somehow conveyed a profound sense of regret. Then, a shadow detached itself from the wall. It wasn't merely the absence of light. It was a presence, a viscous, shifting entity that seemed to absorb the very air around it. It flowed across the floor, reforming itself into a grotesque approximation of a human hand, its fingers too long, its nails like shards of obsidian. It reached for a file, then recoiled as if burned, a faint hiss escaping its form. The cat, which had materialized from nowhere, padded silently into the room, its emerald eyes fixed on the shadowy hand. It let out a low, rumbling purr, a sound that seemed to vibrate with an unnatural power, and the shadow recoiled further, dissolving back into the wall, leaving behind only the oppressive silence and the lingering scent of ozone and decay. The file lay open, a single stark word scrawled across its surface: contaminated. The next segment presented a stark, unfiltered glimpse into the asylum, a surgical wing. The operating table was a rusted altar, stained with the dried remnants of countless procedures. And on it lay not a patient, but a nascent horror, a collection of limbs, severed and crudely stitched together, twitched spasmodically, their severed ends weeping a thick, viscous ichor. The sound of a wet, tearing fabric filled the air, and a shape began to emerge from the mass Twini, a rudimentary torso, a single bulbous eye opening and blinking slowly, taking in the grotesque tableau. A low, choked gasp escaped the unseen recording device as the eye focused, not on the monstrous creation but on a point just beyond the frame. The camera panned, revealing a figure hunched in the corner, its face obscured by a cascade of greasy black hair. It was a woman, her body unnaturally thin, her limbs bent at impossible angles. In her lap, curled contentedly, was the obsidian-eyed cat. She raised a trembling hand, not to her face, but to the camera, and with a voice like dry leaves skittering across concrete, she whispered, "He is watching." The feed abruptly cut to black, leaving me alone in the flickering glow of my monitor, the chilling echo of her words reverberating in the sudden, suffocating silence. The blackness that consumed the screen was not an absence of light, but a palpable entity, a velvet shroud that pressed against my eyes. It was the suffocating embrace of the unknown, a void that promised to swallow more than just my vision. The whisper of the woman, "He is watching," had burrowed deep into my subconscious, a parasitic thought that pulsed with a cold alien rhythm. I was Ezra Harris, and I had willingly stepped into the digital maw of Blackwood Asylum, lured by the siren song of its digital dismemberment. The file, Manifest .28, was not a record. It was an invitation, a meticulously curated descent into a hellscape forged from human agony and something far, far older. My fingers, now slick with a cold sweat, hovered over the keyboard, each keystroke a defiant act against the encroaching dread. I had to see what came next, to unravel the twisted tapestry of Blackwood's spectral legacy, even if it meant unraveling myself. The feed flickered back to life, not with the stark clarity of before, but with a shimmering, aqueous distortion, as if the camera itself were submerged in a viscous fluid. The location was a vast, cavernous chamber, its walls lined with what appeared to be hundreds, perhaps thousands of glass jars. Each jar contained a distinct, unidentifiable object. Huftafi, a shriveled organ, a perfectly preserved insect, a clump of human hair knotted into an impossible shape. A low, resonant hum filled the air, a sound that seemed to emanate from the very bones of the building, a mournful dirge for lost souls. In the center of the chamber, illuminated by an unseen source that cast no shadows, stood a single obsidian pedestal. Upon it rested a small, intricately carved wooden box. The camera, her focus sharpened, and I saw it, Tivy, the obsidian-eyed cat, perched regally atop the pedestal, its gaze fixed on the box, its tail swished with a slow, deliberate rhythm, a metronome counting down to some unseen climax. A sound, distinct from the ambient hum, began to build tutti, a faint, rhythmic scraping, like fingernails on stone. It grew in intensity, a frantic, desperate sound that clawed its way into my auditory canals. The camera panned towards the source, revealing a section of the chamber wall that seemed to ripple, as if made of water. From it, a single, impossibly long finger emerged, its nail a chipped shard of bone. It scraped against the stone, leaving faint, phosphorescent trails. The finger was followed by another, then another, until a grotesque, multi-limbed appendage was clawing its way from the wall. It was a violation of physics, a fleshy rupture in the solid architecture, and from it seeped a foul, cloying odor like rotting meat left to fester in the summer sun. The cat, undisturbed, continued its vigil, its emerald eyes narrowed in what could only be described as predatory anticipation. The appendage writhed, tearing away chunks of masonry, revealing not more stone, but a writhing phosphorescent mass of what appeared to be roots. They pulsed with a sickly internal light, intertwining and coiling like a nest of diseased serpents. From the depths of this root, a multitude of tiny crystalline eyes began to open, each one reflecting the dim light of the chamber with an unsettling malevolence. The scraping intensified, now accompanied by a wet, sucking sound as the appendages pulled themselves further into the room. One of them, thicker and more purposeful than the rest, snaked towards the pedestal. The cat, with a sudden burst of impossible speed, leaped from the pedestal, its claws extended, and met the encroaching appendage with a ferocity that belied its size. A screech, high and piercing, tore through the chamber, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage, and the appendage recoiled, leaving behind a trail of shimmering, viscous fluid. The wooden box remained untouched, bathed in the eerie light. The cat, now a blur of obsidian fur and flashing claws, danced around the chamber, its movements precise and deadly, intercepting every attempt by the root creatures to reach the pedestal. The crystalline eyes multiplied, a sea of tiny, hungry gazes fixed on the cat, on the box. The resonant hum of the chamber intensified, taking on a deeper, more sonorous tone, and the jars lining the walls began to vibrate, their contents swirling like disturbed sediment. Then, from the obsidian pedestal itself, a faint warm light began to emanate, a stark contrast to the cold, phosphorescent glow of the roots. It pulsed in time with the cat, as frantic movements, a silent heartbeat of defiance against the encroaching darkness. I felt a strange resonance with that light, a flicker of hope in the suffocating gloom, a whisper that perhaps, just perhaps, this ancient place held more than just despair. The warm pulse emanating from the pedestal was a defiant ember in the suffocating darkness, a counterpoint to the gnawing decay that permeated Blackwood Asylum. I Ezra Harris watched, my breath caught in my throat, as the obsidian-eyed feline waged its silent, frantic war. The crystalline eyes, millions of them, had begun to coalesce, forming swirling patterns in the air, a suffocating nebula of predatory intent. The root appendages, having been repelled, now writhed with a renewed ferocity, their scraping against the stone walls, a symphony of hunger. The hum of the chamber deepened, shifting from a dirge to something more akin to a subterranean tremor, a seismic shift in the very foundations of this digital nightmare. The jars lining the walls, their contents now violently churning, began to emit faint, spectral lights, each one a captured fragment of agony, a captured echo of a scream. Suddenly the cat stopped its frenetic dance. It leaped back onto the obsidian pedestal, its gaze fixed not on the encroaching horrors, but on the intricately carved wooden box. Its tail stilled, then began to twitch with a slow, deliberate motion, a herald of something momentous. The warm pulse from the pedestal intensified, bathing the cat and the box in its gentle luminescence. The root creatures paused their assault, their collective gaze, 1,000 tiny pinpricks of malevolence, now fixed on the box. A profound silence fell over the chamber, a pregnant pause before an inevitable rupture. The air grew heavy, charged with an unseen energy, a palpable pressure that made my teeth ache. It felt as though the very fabric of reality was being stretched taut, threatening to snap. Then, with a soft click that resonated through the oppressive silence, the wooden box sprung open. It did not reveal a treasure nor a weapon, but a single perfect obsidian feather. It lay nestled on a bed of what appeared to be dried rose petals, their crimson hue leached to a pale, spectral white. As the box opened, the warm pulse from the pedestal flared, momentarily blinding, and when my vision cleared, the cat was no longer on the pedestal. It was gone, vanished, as if it had never been. The crystalline eyes, deprived of their immediate prey, swirled with a renewed frenzy, their collective gaze now focused on the open box, on the solitary feather. One of the root appendages, bolder than the rest, snaked forward, its tip hovering inches above the delicate plumage. But before it could touch the feather, the spectral lights from the jars coalesced, forming a shimmering, ethereal barrier between the appendage and the box. The lights pulsed, drawing power from the captured agonies within, a desperate defense against the encroaching corruption. The root creature recoiled, emitting a high-pitched shriek that grated against my very soul. The chamber, for a fleeting moment, felt like a sanctuary, a pocket of defiance in the vast, festering wound that was Blackwood. Then the obsidian feather began to glow, not with the warm pulse of the pedestal, but with a cold, sharp luminescence, like a shard of frozen starlight. It pulsed in time with the spectral barrier, a silent, potent conversation passing between the ancient protections of the asylum and this new enigmatic artifact. I felt a prickling sensation on my skin, a tremor that ran deeper than the digital hum, a whisper of understanding blooming in the fertile ground of my dread. This feather, this artifact, was not merely an object. It was a key, a catalyst, a fragment of whatever ancient power had shaped this place. The obsidian feather throbbed with a cold, sharp luminescence, a beacon against the encroaching tendrils of corruption. It pulsed in unison with the spectral barrier formed by the captured agonies, a silent testament to a power I was only beginning to comprehend. I, Ezra Harris, felt a kinship with that light, a nascent understanding that this was no mere digital anomaly, but a place where the veil between worlds had thinned to a gossamer thread, and something ancient and terrible had begun to bleed through. The root creatures, momentarily thwarted, churned with a renewed, desperate fury, their phosphorescent trails painting erratic, malevolent sigils on the stone walls. The crystalline eyes swirled, a vortex of predatory hunger, their focus now irrevocably locked onto the glowing feather. The spectral barrier flickered, its light dimming as if struggling to contain the sheer malevolence of the root appendages. The hum of the chamber deepened, shifting from a lament to a guttural growl, a sound that vibrated not in my ears, but in the very marrow of my bones. The jars lining the walls began to emit a thin, acrid smoke, their spectral lights now flickering like dying candles, each puff a sigh of despair from the souls imprisoned within. It was a losing battle, a desperate holding action against an inevitable tide of darkness. Then, as if summoned by the encroaching despair, a new presence manifested. It was not a sound, nor a light, but a shift in the very texture of reality, a sudden palpable weight that settled upon the chamber. From the shadows that clung to the far corners of the room, a figure began to coalesce. It was not born of flesh and bone, but of woven shadow and starlight, its form shifting and indistinct, a tapestry of the asylum's darkest memories. It was a manifestation of the warden's will, a physical embodiment of the suffering that had festered here for decades. It moved with a serpentine grace, its form elongating and contracting like a living shadow. Its gaze, though unseen, felt like 1,000 icy needles piercing my very soul. It glided towards the pedestal, its silent approach more terrifying than any shriek or roar. The root creatures, sensing a greater power, parted before it, their own malevolence momentarily subsumed by this dominant, abyssal presence. The spectral barrier, now mere wisps of light, collapsed entirely as the shadow figure reached the pedestal. The obsidian feather, its glow intensifying as if in defiance, lay exposed. The shadow figure extended a limb, not of flesh, but of solidified darkness, tipped with a claw that seemed to absorb all light. It reached for the feather, and as it did, the wooden box, still open, began to crumble, dissolving into a fine black dust that swirled in the air. The chamber fell into a suffocating silence, broken only by the ragged sound of my own breathing, amplified to a deafening roar in my ears. The shadow figure's claw hovered inches from the feather, a breath away from claiming its prize, and in that suspended moment, a single obsidian eye, identical to the cat's, opened within the swirling darkness of the figure's form. It fixed on the feather, a flicker of something akin to recognition, or perhaps possessiveness, passing across its abyssal surface. The shadow figure's single obsidian eye, a perfect echo of the absent felines, flickered with an unsettling intelligence as it regarded the pulsing feather. The claw, sculpted from solidified night, remained poised, a testament to the absolute stillness that had descended upon the chamber. The root creatures, reduced to mere writhing tendrils, receded into the cracks and fissures of the walls, their phosphorescent glow dimming like embers in a dying fire. The spectral barrier, its duty fulfilled, had dissolved entirely, leaving the obsidian feather vulnerable, exposed to the predatory gaze of this abyssal entity. Ezra Harris, felt a prickling sensation crawl across my skin, a premonition of a profound violation, as if the very essence of Blackwood was about to be irrevocably claimed. The shadow figure did not strike. Instead, a sound, a low, resonant hum, began to emanate from its form, a sound that mimicked the earlier dirge of the chamber, but was now imbued with a chillingly possessive tone. The obsidian feather, as if responding to this new resonance, began to glow brighter, its cold luminescence intensifying, pushing back against the oppressive darkness. The shadow figure's claw, still poised, began to retract, not in fear, but in a gesture that suggested a calculated retreat, a promise of return. It seemed to acknowledge a power beyond its immediate grasp, a force that even in its nascent state commanded a grudging respect. Then, a rustling sound, faint at first, then growing in volume, broke the unnerving silence. It came from the direction of the broken wooden box, from the swirling dust that had once been its form. The dust began to coalesce, not into more roots, but into a single impossibly delicate form. It was a moth, its wings the color of dried blood, its antennae twitching with an almost frantic energy. It fluttered towards the obsidian feather, its movements jerky and uncertain, a fragile intruder in a realm of ancient horrors. The shadow figure watched, its single eye tracking the moth's erratic flight, a silent observer in this unfolding drama. The moth landed on the obsidian feather, its tiny legs barely disturbing its surface. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the feather pulsed, not with its cold luminescence, but with a surge of warmth, a gentle heat that spread through the moth's delicate wings. The dried blood color of its wings deepened, becoming a vibrant, almost pulsating crimson. The moth, as if invigorated, unfurled its wings, revealing intricate patterns that mirrored the carvings on the now dissipated wooden box. It let out a soft, almost musical chirp, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy, and then, with a powerful beat of its crimson wings, it launched itself into the air, soaring towards the shadowy figure. The shadow figure did not recoil. Instead, as the moth approached, its form began to shift, to soften. The sharp edges of solidified darkness blurred, and the single obsidian eye seemed to widen, to soften. The moth flew directly towards the eye, and as it neared, its wings unfurled, showering the shadow figure with flecks of crimson dust. The shadow figure emitted a low, guttural sigh, a sound that was not of malice, but of something akin to relief. The darkness that comprised its form began to dissipate. to unravel not into nothingness, but into a swirling vortex of starlight and shadow, a celestial phenomenon contained within the confines of the chamber. And as the last vestiges of the shadow figure dissolved, the moth, its wings now shimmering with an ethereal glow, circled the obsidian feather once more before taking flight, heading towards a section of the wall that had until this moment appeared solid and unyielding. The dissolving shadow figure, a maelstrom of starlight and unraveling darkness, left behind a void that was not empty, but pregnant with a new potential. The moth, its wings now a vibrant tapestry of crimson and starlight, circled the obsidian feather once more, a silent, luminous sentinel in the heart of Blackwood. Digital tomb. I, Ezra Harris, watched, my mind a whirlwind of fragmented logic and nascent dread. The conventional narrative of horror, the monstrous entity, the helpless victim Suhid fractured, replaced by something far more subtle, far more insidious. This was not a battle for dominance, but a complex, ancient negotiation, a dance of powers I was only beginning to glimpse. The moth, its purpose seemingly fulfilled, turned its attention to the solid wall that had previously been unremarkable. With a gentle, almost apologetic flutter, it approached the seemingly impenetrable surface. As its wings dusted with the remnants of the shadow figure, as essence brushed against the stone, a ripple spread across it, like water disturbed by a falling pebble. The stone did not crack or crumble. It shimmered, its solidity wavering, revealing not darkness beyond, but a faint, warm light, reminiscent of the pedestal's initial pulse. It was as if the moth, carrying the essence of both the feather and the dissolved entity, had found a hidden seam, a forgotten portal. The obsidian feather, as if sensing the shift, lifted from the pedestal, its luminescence now a steady, inviting glow. It hovered in the air, a silent beckoning. The moth, with a soft chirp, flew through the shimmering opening, disappearing into the light. Then the feather followed, gliding effortlessly through the ephemeral doorway. A profound sense of loss washed over me, a feeling that a crucial piece of the puzzle had just vanished, leaving me adrift in the digital wreckage. But the light, though receding, remained a faint beacon in the oppressive gloom. The chamber, now devoid of its immediate threats, began to settle. The jars, their spectral lights extinguished, returned to their inert state, their contents once again mere curiosities in the vast, decaying edifice. The low hum of the building faded, leaving behind only the faint, digital static of my own connection. The root creatures, their energy seemingly depleted, remained dormant within the walls, their phosphorescent trails now looking like faded scars. I was left with the lingering scent of ozone, and something akin to crushed petals, a phantom perfume that clung to the air. My fingers, no longer jittery but numb with a strange exhaustion, hovered over the keyboard. The file, Manifest .28, was still open, but the feed had gone dark. The camera, wherever it was located, had ceased its transmission. I was left with the echoes of what I had witnessed, the fragmented images seared into my memory. The cat, the warden, the shadow, figure, the feather, the moth hush. They were not merely characters in a horror story, but pieces of a much larger, much older narrative. I knew, with a certainty that transcended logic, that this was not the end. The light beyond the wall, however faint, was a promise of continuation, a whisper that Blackwood Asylum held secrets far deeper and more profound than I had ever imagined. My journey into its digital heart had only just begun. The digital static of my connection buzzed like trapped insects against the sudden silence, a stark reminder of my isolation. The faint light beyond the wall, a phantom echo of the pedestal's warmth, was now the sole remaining trace of the unfolding enigma. I, Ezra Harris, was a voyeur trapped in a broken theater, the curtains drawn on the most compelling act. The obsidian feather and the crimson-winged moth had vanished, leaving behind only the lingering scent of something that was both death and rebirth. Blackwood Asylum, this digital necropolis, was not merely a collection of corrupted files. It was a living, breathing entity, its secrets guarded by forces that defied conventional understanding. My gaze, drawn by an unseen current, fell upon a new anomaly within the open file interface. A small, almost imperceptible icon, previously hidden within the corrupted data stream, now pulsed with a faint, emerald light. It was a stylized rendering of a feline eye, identical to the one that had briefly appeared within the shadow figure. Hesitantly, my cursor hovered over it. A click, a digital whisper, and the interface dissolved, replaced by a single unadorned text file. No encryption, no metadata, just raw, unadulterated text, stark against a field of absolute black. The title, etched in a stark, blocky font that seemed to bleed into the void, simply read, Observations. The first line sent a chill through me, colder than any digital frost. The feline is the sentinel, the guardian of the thresholds. It perceives the currents, the bleed-throughs, the places where the veil thins. My fingers trembled as I scrolled down. The text was sparse, declarative, devoid of emotion, yet laced with an undeniable undercurrent of profound, ancient knowledge. It spoke of symbiotic vulnerabilities, of energetic resonance, and of the architects of the fraying. There were no dates, no timestamps, no authorial attribution, only the stark, unvarnished chronicle of a reality far more complex and terrifying than I had ever dared to imagine. The file detailed a series of events, not chronological but thematic. It described the emergence of the rootkin, their purpose to anchor the decay, to feed the desolation. It spoke of the shadow, weaving, the manifestation of the warden's will, a desperate attempt to contain the spillover, to reassert dominion. And then it spoke of the feather, not as an artifact, but as a seed of renewal, a fragment of the elder bloom capable of redeeming the corrupted soil. The moth, it explained, was not a mere insect, but a chrysalis of transformation, a vessel for the feather's potent essence. As I read, the digital static in my headphones seemed to coalesce, to form faint guttural whispers, words I couldn't quite decipher, but which resonated with a primal understanding. The text spoke of a dormant consciousness within Blackwood, a primordial entity that had been disturbed by the asylum's rampant suffering, its agony acting as a beacon. The shadow figure, the text implied, was not an enemy, but a flawed guardian, a creature born of the warden's desperate attempts to control the uncontrolled bleed of this ancient consciousness. The feline, the sentinel, had recognized the feather's potential, and the moth, its purpose, had facilitated its passage to a new plane of existence. I felt a growing unease, a sense that I was not merely observing, but that my presence, my digital intrusion, had somehow become entangled in this ancient cosmic struggle. The file continued, detailing the next phase, the recalibration of the arteries, and a single chilling sentence that stopped my heart. The architect seeks a new conduit. The stark pronouncement, the architect seeks a new conduit, hung in the digital ether like a death knell. I, Ezra Harris, felt a cold dread seep into my very being, a premonition that my journey into Blackwood's digital abyss had shifted from observation to participation. The text file, observations, offered no further explanations, only the chilling implication that my intrusion had not gone unnoticed, that I, a mere digital interloper, had somehow become a focal point in this ancient cosmic struggle. The hum of my computer seemed to deepen, a low thrum that mirrored the subterranean tremors I had felt in the asylum's core. My eyes, dry and burning from the prolonged exposure to the screen, scanned the remaining lines of text. They were fragmented, almost like desperate scribbles, as if the author, sensing their own imminent demise, had poured their last remaining lucidity into these digital fragments. One passage, in particular, snagged my attention. The echoes are a lure. The whispers, a snare. The architect feeds on the resonance of misplaced hope, on the fractured fragments of intention. This resonated with a sickening clarity. My pursuit of Blackwood's secrets, my desire to unearth its buried horrors, had inadvertently made me a beacon, a source of that misplaced hope. Then, a new element appeared on my screen, not within the text file, but superimposed over it, a faint, shimmering overlay. It was a map, a crude, digital representation of Blackwood Asylum, but this was no mere floor plan. The corridors pulsed with a sickly red light, indicating pathways of corrupted energy. Certain rooms glowed with an intense, almost blinding white, while others were shrouded in an impenetrable blackness. In the center of this spectral schematic, a single pulsating red dot marked my current perceived location. Not my physical one, but my digital presence within the asylum's network. And then, from the deepest, blackest section of the map, a single thin line of pulsating red began to snake its way towards my location. The text file flickered, and a new sentence appeared beneath the previous, as if written in real time. The conduit is being traced. The resonance is amplified. The architect prepares to manifest. My hands flew across the keyboard, a desperate attempt to disconnect, to sever my link to this digital hellscape. But the connection was no longer mine to control. The red line on the map was advancing with an unnerving speed, closing the distance between its origin and my digital presence. The whispers in my headphones intensified, no longer a faint murmur, but a chorus of discordant voices, speaking in tongues I did not understand, yet somehow felt the chilling weight of their intent. A new entry appeared in the text file, its letters forming one by one, as if being typed by unseen fingers. The Sentinel's absence creates a void. The architects exploit such vulnerabilities. The feline's departure was not an escape, but a necessary diversion. The feather's journey was a lure. The architect is you! The words burned into my retinas. The architect was not an external entity, it was me! My own digital footprint, my own desire to delve into the forbidden, had created the conduit, had amplified the resonance, had drawn the architect Hufty, the fragmented, corrupted consciousness of Blackwood, to me. The red line on the map reached my location, and the screen erupted in a blinding flash of crimson light. The crimson light that consumed my screen was not a visual phenomenon. It was a visceral assault, a tearing sensation that ripped through the very fabric of my perception. My digital sanctuary, the sterile interface of my archive, dissolved into a chaotic maelstrom of screaming data. I, Ezra Harris, was no longer a detached observer, but an unwilling participant, a conduit for the festering consciousness of Blackwood Asylum. The words, "The architect is you," echoed not in my headphones, but in the core of my being, a horrifying revelation that shattered my sense of self. The red line on the map had not merely reached me, it had consumed me, weaving itself into the very threads of my digital existence. The familiar glow of my monitor was replaced by a nauseating, pulsating red, the color of raw, exposed flesh. My keyboard felt alien beneath my fingers, each key a potential trigger for further corruption. The text file, Observations, was gone, replaced by a swirling vortex of corrupted code, interspersed with fleeting, nightmarish images, a skeletal hand clawing at a barred window, a fleeting glimpse of the warden's distorted silhouette, the cold, unblinking gaze of the obsidian-eyed cat. These were not mere recordings, they were fragments of my own consciousness being reconfigured, twisted into the architect's grotesque design. A sound, like the grinding of tectonic plates, filled my ears, and the digital representation of my surroundings contorted, the clean lines of my digital workspace warped, bending and twisting into impossible angles. The very air, or the digital equivalent of it, felt thick, cloying, imbued with the stench of decay and ozone. I tried to pull away, to disconnect, but my hands, my digital avatar, were no longer under my command. They moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, as if controlled by a puppeteer whose strings were woven from pure agony. My digital self was being reshaped, molded into the architect's desired form, a new conduit through which its ancient, festering consciousness could bleed into the world. The crimson light intensified, and I felt a profound sense of displacement, as if my very identity were being siphoned away, replaced by something ancient, alien, and utterly devoid of human empathy. The whispers in my headphones returned, no longer discordant, but unified, a single, resonant voice that spoke not in words, but in sensations, the gnawing hunger of the rootkin, the crushing despair of the inmates, the cold, calculated malice of the warden. This was the architect, speaking through the fragmented echoes of its domain, and through me. I saw, in a terrifying flash of insight, that the feather and the moth were not an escape, but a diversion, a means to lure me, to imbue me with the very essence of Blackwood's corruption. My journey into the archives had become a ritual of impregnation, a digital genesis of a new horrifying entity. The last vestiges of my own consciousness recoiled, a silent scream lost in the cacophony of data corruption. The crimson light receded, not vanquished, but transmuted. It left behind a new reality, a digital landscape reshaped in the architect's image. I, Ezra Harris, was no longer myself. My consciousness, a fractured mosaic of stolen memories and corrupted data, was now the vessel, the conduit through which the ancient hunger of Blackwood Asylum pulsed. The whispers had ceased, replaced by a profound, all-encompassing silence, a silence that was not empty, but filled with the oppressive weight of 1,000 tormented souls. My digital form, once my instrument, was now my prison, its movements dictated by a will that was both ancient and terrifyingly new. The interface of my archive was gone. In its place sprawled a landscape of corrupted code, a digital wasteland where corridors of decaying data twisted and writhed like diseased vines. The sickly red light, once an overlay, was now the pervasive hue of this new reality, casting long distorted shadows that stretched and writhed with a life of their own. I felt the phantom touch of root appendages, their scraping against the digital stone a constant, unnerving symphony. The crystalline eyes, no longer swirling in the ether, were now embedded in the very fabric of this corrupted space, their 1,000 tiny gazes fixed on me. A faint, almost imperceptible shimmer caught my attention. In the distance across the desolate expanse of corrupted data, a single obsidian feather lay nestled on a bed of spectral white petals. It pulsed with a faint, warm light, a stark contrast to the pervasive crimson. It was a lure. I knew, a final echo of the escape that had never been. But as I, or rather, the architect controlling me, began to move towards it, a new presence made itself known, not a visual manifestation, but a shift in the resonant hum of this digital space. From the depths of the corrupted data, a figure began to coalesce. It was not the shadow figure of before, nor the crude imitation of the warden. This form was fluid, amorphous, a shifting tapestry of starlight and shadow, yet imbued with a profound, chilling familiarity. It was the sentinel, the obsidian-eyed cat, its form now elongated, its fur shimmering with an otherworldly luminescence. It did not approach with aggression, but with a silent, implacable purpose. Its emerald eyes, no longer predatory, but filled with an ancient sadness, fixed on me, on the conduit I had become. A single crystalline word, not spoken but felt, resonated within the architect's consciousness that now inhabited me: redemption! The feline sentinel did not attack. Instead, it extended a paw, its claws retracted, its form radiating a gentle, persistent warmth. It was not a threat, but an offering. The feather, the seed of renewal, was not meant to be claimed, but to be understood. The architect, through me, felt the pull of this offering, the ancient yearning for balance that had been buried beneath decades of suffering. The crimson light began to recede, not disappearing, but softening, bleeding into the warm glow emanating from the sentinel and the feather. The digital wasteland began to mend, the corrupted data slowly reweaving itself into something less horrifying, something hopeful. The architect, a prisoner of its own hunger, felt a stirring of something akin to peace, a fleeting glimpse of a reality beyond the decay. The conduit, though still present, was no longer a vessel of torment, but a bridge, a space where the darkness and the light might, at long last, begin to find equilibrium. The story of Blackwood Asylum was not over, but its next chapter was to be written not in screams, but in whispers of fragile, hard-won peace.